Okay, Mr. Mayor and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This is Jim Wunderman from the Bay Area Council. It's great to have everyone take part in today's Bay Area Impact webinar series that we've been running since the pandemic took hold, and talk about impact. Lots and lots of conversation over the last few months about Bay Area exodus. There not too many days go by in which there isn't a story about this, and a lot of conversations being had. And at the Bay Area Council, we take this very, very seriously. It's not just what we see in the news, but what we hear that's not in the news that concerns us a lot about the potential loss of companies, of talent, of opportunity lost, and so forth. And we're concerned about the impact on the economy, all parts of the economy, businesses large and small, and so forth. So we think the pandemic, obviously, the move toward remote work, when you couple it with homelessness and housing issues, the wildfires, you kind of name it. Are we in a perfect storm? You could say that we are. How serious is it? There's differences of view on that, and that's what we're here to discuss today. We're looking at, on a statewide basis, the U.S. Census says California may be losing population for the first time in recorded history when they started recording this back in 1900. So, very, very concerned about this, and there hasn't been that much speaking out from public officials on this matter, but fortunately, a couple of weeks ago, the San Francisco Chronicle published an editorial from our very own mayor, Sam Liccardo, from the wonderful city of San Jose, who really spoke out about the concern and the potential downsides of this, and asked that we not, the article was entitled, "Don't Blame Tech for the Exodus." And I think the mayor really took us through some great thoughts on, what's actually driving this, and said, these are actually policy decisions that we're making, or lack of activity and responsivity on our part to real challenges that's enabling this to happen. And so we're here to talk to Mayor Liccardo today about this. And I hope we'll have I expect we'll have a vibrant conversation, and it's just great, always great to have Mayor Liccardo with us. So Sam, thank you for joining us today. Before we start this, maybe just give us 60 seconds on beyond this, how are things going in San Jose?
Well, Jim, thanks. And thanks for having me. I'm so grateful for your leadership, particularly on this issue. I know you've been a thought leader on this for some time, and I loved your expression about, the business climate deniers. We've got a lot of work to do, but things here in San Jose are going about as well as can be expected during a horrible pandemic. The good news is the community's really pulled together in a significant way, and we've seen tens of millions of dollars contributed to try to support families in need. We're seeing more than 4,000 volunteers came out to help us distribute food, and we're getting more now out to vaccination centers. What we're really seeing is the mettle of the community in a wonderful way. And obviously that's a hopeful sign amid all the challenge.
Yeah, I know your county, Santa Clara County, was really, took very strong steps right from the very beginning, and has maintained them, and has seen, some of the spikes, the most serious spikes in the Bay Area have come there, seeming like, maybe, some light at the end of the tunnel here. Let's all hope so, because we've been at this too long. So getting to the issues around the nature of the business climate, why did you choose to write this commentary? Why did you choose this time to do it?
Well, I know that I didn't express anything that many of us didn't already know or feel, but I thought it was important that it came from somebody in government, because I think the perception is that government doesn't get it by, I think, many employers, and I understand why they feel that way. And I think it's important for us to convey that there are some of us in government who are trying hard, and we know there's a lot of work to be done. And frankly, we need to call each other out to some extent as leaders, as political leaders, to say, look, this is our time to actually step up to do something about this. It's easy to write it off as a problem that's just a result of a pandemic-induced recognition of the ability of remote work. But the reality is this has been going on, all these challenges that are fomenting that, you called a perfect storm. This is stuff that's been building for years. We've known about how our policy choices have been affecting everything from housing costs to taxes, regulation, all the policies that have gone into this cauldron of challenge for employers. And so this is an opportunity, I think, in this crisis for us to take a different look. And crises usually are moments when there are significant shifts in the economy as well as in policy. And this is a moment when I think we can hopefully take a fresh look at this, particularly during a time of such severe unemployment in many of our communities, when hopefully that there's some momentum and impetus to do something.
Yes, thank you. San Jose struggled for a long time to become kind of the true capital of Silicon Valley from a business perspective. But under your leadership, we've seen tremendous gains, and a lot of companies have, are really moving into San Jose and calling San Jose home and growing and investing there. So, you must be in touch with a lot of the major top business leaders in the region. What are you hearing that you feel you could tell us from them? Like, what are their concerns, and how worried are you?
Well, their concerns are certainly not new to, I think, anybody on this call. It's about housing costs and the challenges of obviously keeping employees here when there are a lot of cheaper places to live. It's around regulatory policies, everything from AB5 to privacy bill passed back in 2019 to Prop 65. We can go down the list. Certainly taxes are a big concern. And we know there are new tax proposals coming as we speak in Sacramento. And we've seen many pop up just over the last year in individual cities. So those are all concerns. And I also hear a lot about energy costs. There's no question that our approach is not working right now in this state. We have enormous tens of billions of dollars in infrastructure that needs to be repaired, upgraded, replaced, particularly as we think about PG&E up here in Northern California. All that is putting increasing pressures on those that need energy for manufacturing. Yes, we still do manufacturing here in the Bay Area, believe it or not, both here in San Jose and nearby in Fremont and elsewhere. And so, those are all driving concerns for a lot of folks. But what I'm also hearing is just a certain sentiment that they're just not wanted. Those of us who recognize that tech has been the lifeblood of our economy in many ways, our community for decades here, are a little frustrated that suddenly folks discovered we have all these problems and that tech should be to blame for all of them. And I think it's natural, for a lot of employers to say, well, we'd rather go somewhere where they actually want us and they're willing to engage with us before they decide to pass the newest regulation or tax.
Yeah, we certainly hear that a lot. It's kind of strange when society starts to blame its employers for the problems of the society. That I don't see how that can come to a good affect. You start off your piece talking a lot about housing, and why don't you take us through? Any conversation with a business leader is likely to generate the response that the housing issue is a really big problem for the company. Talk about the nature of the problem from your perspective, and what do you think could be done about it?
Yeah, I think there's a certain sentiment that companies must want to move somewhere else because housing costs are lower elsewhere, and certainly there's some truth to that. But what we're seeing is that it's really bifurcated. We know that employers who want to be here because the talent that is so unique here will continue to be here, at least for now. Obviously, the clouds are darkening, but the two big announcements here in San Jose were around Hewlett Packard Enterprises and Align Technologies about them moving headquarters out of state. And with both companies, interestingly enough, over the last year, they've actually been expanding the number of workers here in San Jose. So they're not taking the engineers, the computer science, the designers, they're taking the heads of the companies. Obviously, it's a regulatory and tax issue, I'm sure, for companies that are just moving headquarters, but also they recognize, hey, we can go hire attorneys, we can go hire administrative staff somewhere else at a much lower cost. And that's not talent that's unique here. That's talent that can be found anywhere in the country. And so And so the housing costs are driving folks out around those professions where they know that we don't have a competitive advantage. And I guess, the traditional tale has been, well, we have a lot of tech workers and that's driving up housing costs, and certainly that's part of it. But the reality is it's construction costs that are making it really difficult to get housing built right now.
Yeah.
And it's all the familiar factors, what I call the 4 Ls, which is land, labor, litigation, and local control, that are really driving costs of construction in a way that are really inhibiting our ability to get a lot more housing built.
Why do you think the legislature appears reluctant to really kind of dig deep when it comes to fixing those kinds of issues? Because we've proposed a lot of fixes, we've gotten a lot of bills passed, probably made some progress, but doesn't seem to be up to what Governor Newsom called for in his State of the State message a year ago, where he said we needed to build north of 3 million homes here in California in a hurry. It doesn't seem like the legislative response has been, anything close to what would be needed. Why the reluctance?
Yeah, it seemed as though we had a lot of momentum at the beginning of last year before the pandemic, and the stars were starting to align to do some big things around housing production. And we just talked to the chair of the Assembly Housing Committee yesterday, David Chu, who's a tremendous leader and has done an awful lot of good in this space. And he was frustrated. Obviously, the pandemic has taken us all off course in many, many ways. I think it would be easy for us just to blame Sacramento, and there's plenty of blame to go there. But the reality is each of our local communities are very much to blame. I said one of the 4 Ls was local control. And our obsession with local control is killing us in the Bay Area and is preventing the ability of builders to get out there and build density, particularly in suburban communities. I think you'll see some of the larger cities, certainly Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, Berkeley, that are quite receptive to density, and others are not. And that is a huge challenge for us. And yes, some of that could be fixed at the state level. For example, Scott Wiener's bill, which I know is hugely controversial, and God love Senator Wiener for his courage. And I will continue to support his efforts in that regard. But he's just getting pummeled every time he's talking to any local elected official over the issue. And he just went through a very difficult reelection. And so I think we need to recognize that local control is a huge challenge. And certainly the business community should go out there and support those courageous legislators, that the Wieners and the Chews of the world are out there pushing the envelope. But we know there's other factors too. There's very powerful forces that are supporting the status quo. And I'm a Democrat. I believe in union labor. I believe in the importance of unions. But there are real challenges with right now, particularly the use of CEQA. And it's not just labor unions, certainly others as well. But I think unions are very unwilling to let go of CEQA in many ways because of the leverage that provides around ensuring that developers and builders use union labor. I know that there are issues that we can negotiate to get to a better solution than having projects held up with CEQA suits. And it's certainly housing, but it's other things too, other important things we want to do. I'm trying to build BART into downtown San Jose. We finally got it open here in San Jose, but trying to get downtown. And for a year and a half, VTA spent more than $1 million on a CEQA suit that actually came from San Jose Sharks because they want more parking. I mean, it has nothing to do with the environment, of course. No environmentalists would support more parking anywhere. But, those are the kinds of issues that people are using with CEQA. So we know that there are powerful forces, whether it's labor unions, local control, and others, that we need to be able to come to the table and get beyond this. For example, there's no question that the shortage of labor right now is a huge challenge in construction. And we need to be able to come to deal, and get to the table with labor to say, look, we need to be able to broaden the pipeline here to be able to get more folks into building trades. And if folks are terrified about how that might diminish wages, then let's come up with some compromises. But it feels as though we've lost the ability in this state to be able to push through those gridlocks. And I'd like to believe we can do this collaboratively, but one way or another, we need to recognize the urgency of this.
Yeah, one thing I kind of wonder is there a table? because we've been having this conversation for a while, and it seems like year over year, the building trades unions have become more strident about demands to have, require skilled workforce on, virtually any housing scenario, which, for certain kind of projects isn't a problem, but for certain types of projects in parts of the states, it makes the ultimate product unmarketable. And so, uh, how do you get a table where we could all sit around? I think your editorial is important, and it's sort of a moment in time where, if this is in fact such a big issue, maybe there's something we could be doing that we haven't been doing to actually work this out, because it's so important that we work this out.
Yeah, that's a great point you make, Jim. And I wish I had the simple solution. I think we're going to probably be able to move at the speed of trust, because right now I know there's a distrust that somehow or another those of us who are advocates for expanding production are going to somehow or another diminish the power and the well-being of those who might be currently having the most control over the process. And I don't have a simple answer, but to say, the fact that there is a recall election does not help.
Yeah.
And I think it pushes everybody into the corners farther. And, again, this may be a partisan message on my part, but I'm really hoping we can get beyond this recall, because it just makes it so difficult to be able to pull people into the middle where we critically need to be to get to solutions.
Yeah, it certainly sets the tone for a more difficult legislative session when you have this kind of a major factor overhanging it. San Jose actually wasn't a city that was welcoming to housing. It was, sort of had a history of being really a sort of suburban feeling city. And but that's really changed. What changed San Jose to become one of those places that sees density in a positive way and seems to have become part of the culture there?
Well, I think the investment in transit has helped enormously. We recognize the importance for us to move from a suburban model to an urban one. And in many ways, Silicon Valley, I think, has been hindered by the suburban pattern of development. I mean, we at least before the pandemic, we certainly saw it on the freeways every morning, just the amount of pain and suffering people were putting up with to get from one place to another. And there's a growing recognition, certainly, and this is not recent, but that, if you want to attract talented, creative people, it's a heck of a lot easier to do it in an urban setting where they are attracted by all the offerings of great cities. And certainly I think San Francisco has demonstrated that amply in the past. And we need to move to an urban model if we're going to continue to attract talented, creative young people who want to be in those settings. We also recognize, I think, the environmental imperative. There's a fiscal imperative as well. We just can't continue to sprawl as we have. So we are engaged in the very difficult work of retrofitting a city that was built for automobiles into a city built for people. And that means a lot more density. And I think we have a growing consensus. A consensus might be too strong a word, but certainly a growing sense that people want to move into that future.
Yeah, indeed. It's exciting to see it go in that direction. I recall being at a joint venture Silicon Valley event years ago in which Mayor Reed, your predecessor, was giving an award to a young woman from middle school about she had done great scholastically, and he asked her, what do you love about San Jose? And she said, I love it being a suburban community. And she was about 12 years old. And I sat back in my seat. I thought, we have some challenges ahead. We need to move the next generation. So hopefully we've had some effect. My a good friend, Peter Lucchetti, asked questions around the nature of the culture of our society and how we see business here. And I think you represented downtown San Jose on the council, and now you've been mayor, for quite a number of years, and you've got a good working relationship with the business community. But what's the problem with us? I mean, what is business doing to engender such a negative view with folks that we're not really necessarily as welcome at that table that I'm not sure exists as we'd like to be.
Yeah, that's a really important question. I, I look, I personally believe that tech is doing what tech should be doing, which is employing people and providing great standard of living to an awful lot of families that depend on those paychecks, and innovating in ways, particularly in a time like this in a pandemic. Some of those innovations are pretty darn important. So as I see, in terms of what tech could be doing more to be building more trust, I think about, for example, some of the larger announcements around supporting affordable housing, for example. And you saw folks like, Chuck Robbins at Cisco coming out very early saying, I'm going to just give $50 million for homelessness because this is a critical need. And then there were some subsequent announcements, and some were very helpful, and some were just, yeah, we're going to offer loans. And it wasn't, I think some over time people have started to recognize, well, you know what, maybe the big announcement wasn't really all that substantive. And I guess what I would say for those tech companies that are really interested, engaged in trying to breach this divide is we need really hard commitments, and commitments that demonstrate you're really with the community in a way. And we know that tech companies, of course, don't just employ people here, and they don't just serve people here. They serve customers, 95% of whom live outside this country typically, and their employees may be outside the country as well. But in terms of building local commitment, after a while, I think people start to get suspicious of the big announcements, and they want to see more direct and more continued engagement. And we see that from many companies. It's fair to say it hasn't been universal. And I am constantly reaching out, certainly asking for help in various ways, and I pester more than most. But I think that a lot of tech companies recognize that the benefit it brings to their employees, feeling good about who they're working for and the work they're doing, because let's face it, a lot of tech employees are mission driven. That's why they're doing what they're doing. That we can all get to a better place that way.
Yeah, I think it's obviously critical to have your employees feel like they're part of a company that's moving the needle on issues that are in the front and center in their conscience. At the same time, I would just say it seems like we've kind of come to take tech for granted, and
Yeah.
the things that tech delivers, and our lives are just my view that there's so much improved because of technology, and the companies that are in the lead on tech, they're confronting issues about, First Amendment issues, because they're so big, and they're in control of information and decisions about how it's disseminated and so forth. But if you take those companies out of the mix, I don't think our society would be better for it. And maybe groups like the Bay Area Council need to do a better job of reminding people about these kind of benefits. And I think we're very fortunate in this region to have this confluence of incredible world-leading organizations, and I'd hate to see them see us as not appreciating their participation in the region, which I think, and probably to their own view, is pretty great on a number of fronts.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. It's an excellent point, Jim. And the extent to which there's a strong desire right now in Washington to break up big tech, I just don't know that members of Congress are just that cognizant about where that leads us. Right now, we've got, we're not just a bunch of companies here in the United States competing against each other. We're competing against the Alibabas and the Tencents of China, and we are certainly going to be an enormous disadvantage if companies cannot scale to be able to compete on a global landscape like those companies can. And there are some great advantages, certainly, in having scale and technology. And certainly we think about the great evils that many have pointed to. For example, I think there's been a lot of discussion in public circles about how the assault at the Capitol was a result of folks using social media in various ways to rile up right-wing groups, and certainly left-wing, Intifada, and so forth. The reality is, if you've got 400 different social platforms, you have a much more difficult time holding anybody responsible for that communication than if
Yeah.
it's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And so I think it's really important for us to recognize that simply breaking up big tech is not going to be a great solution for all of us. What we probably might need, certainly Mark Zuckerberg's been very clear with regard to the First Amendment issues. Hey, if government thinks it should be regulated, then come up with some regulations. And he's actually invited it. But breaking up tech, I don't think is going to be the solution.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. The conversations brought forth a number of questions around housing affordability. Scott Littlehale, I believe from the Carpenters Union, writes about the wages. Shouldn't the folks from labor be able to earn enough wages to actually afford a house? Jeffrey Heller writes about, a couple of other folks write about, Richard Liu, about what should be the right level of affordability in the mix as we produce housing. So, our view in the Bay Area Council historically was, we stopped building enough housing, and we need to build it at all levels. I think your partner in San Francisco, Mayor Breed, says that a lot. But what's the right mix? Some communities say we should only support affordable housing, the subsidized affordable housing 100%. And others say, well, every time you subsidize affordable housing with housing, you're driving up the price of the market rate units and you're exacerbating the problem. What's the right level, and how do we pay for how do we pay for the housing we know we need that a lot of people can't afford?
Yeah, the reality is we can't possibly build enough subsidized housing to solve the affordability gap. The numbers are far too great. And to give you a sense, here in Santa Clara County, in 2016, we passed a nearly $1 billion measure for affordable housing. And then we passed another measure last year in the city of San Jose. It's providing roughly, depending on the year, somewhere between $50–70 million a year. But if you just look at the unhoused population in Santa Clara County, nearly 10,000 unhoused residents. And the typical cost of building apartments anywhere in the Bay Area, or at least in the South Bay in San Francisco, is about $700,000 a unit. You've got a $7 billion problem to solve, and nobody has the public resources to do that. And so I think we need to be honest about the fact that it's going to take a private sector solution, and that means a lot more supply. And so there's going to need to be a combination, certainly, of subsidized housing, which I support very much, and higher density private sector housing that is entirely built by the private sector. And that means we've got to do something about this construction cost. And, I think the point's well taken, from the member of the Carpenters Union. Look, this is not, by the way, uniform with all unions. I can tell you within the building trades, there are unions I know, I've been working with carpenters, laborers, and others who are very bullish on doing more and recognizing the importance of doing more. And there are others who are quite happy to use leverage to hold us back. And I think, we need to all get on the same page about the importance of building more. I think one thing we are learning through this pandemic is that in times of emergency, we can move a lot faster and more nimbly. And I'll just take this small example with regard to homeless housing, because it's been a huge challenge for us. As I mentioned, $700,000 a unit, very difficult to solve this problem. And it takes 4 or 5 years to get an apartment project out of the ground, through the development process, and then finally to lease up. So we're not going to solve this problem through traditional methods. And so, when Governor Newsom, to his credit, came out with Hap Funding about 1.5 years ago, this is a form of funding for homeless solutions, and basically said to the mayors who had been urging for some time, just give us flexibility, let us use the money, and then hold us accountable for the results. So with that $27 million that we got, we rapidly built 3 separate projects using prefab modular housing on public land. And we didn't build them in 4 years. We built the first one in 4 months, and it didn't cost us $700,000 a unit. We did it, the first one, in $95,000 a unit.
Wow.
And this is what we can do when we push the red tape out of the way, because under the pandemic, we had emergency orders, and CEQA was also held in abeyance because of the governor's, I think, foresight. And we were able to move quickly, and that's emergency housing we're now using today for folks who need to be separately housed because of COVID, and it's going to continue to serve us after the pandemic with transitional housing. I think what we can show is that we can do this when we recognize the urgency. And the urgency simply has to continue to be there after the pandemic.
Yeah, I wonder, the governor was able to put aside the Brown Act as a result of the pandemic by declaring an emergency in effect so that we could continue to actually have public meetings. And it's actually worked out pretty well. The more people attend the public meetings, and I like it. I don't know if we're going back. What about, is there a possibility, I guess it's a legal question, but you're a lawyer, is there a possibility of declaring an emergency for housing where you can put aside some CEQA and some other rules so that you can, just as you just described me, that's awfully enticing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all recognize it's been an emergency for many years. So why not? And by the way, there have been a whole bunch of CEQA exemptions that have been passed. The problem is it's just a Swiss cheese regulation now at this point. And what we need is just a very clear line, so that way people have a very clear set of expectations, like any business would want to have, about whether they can go or not. And I'm going to be testifying on Monday in front of the Senate on a CEQA streamlining bill so that Google can build a 7 million square foot campus and build 5,000 units of housing. And 25% of them are going to be rent restricted and affordable. And this is the most environmentally sensitive project probably in the history of the Valley. It's going to be, zero emissions, and they're probably going to build it out of eggshells. It's right around a major transit center, and we still have to get a CEQA streamlining bill because people can hold it up for non-environmental reasons. That's obviously not the purpose of CEQA.
Yeah, well, CEQA's become rather expansive, but if we're, it's only one, but certainly a major one of the challenges that we face that just drive up the cost and drive up the time. But that is encouraging that you were able to do that. Talk a little bit more about homelessness. And I saw, just a couple of days ago, you made an announcement about sort of new approach on the Guadalupe River.
Yeah.
How do you see us being able, we have the highest unsheltered population in the country by far here in California. Maybe half of all unsheltered homeless people are here, even though the populations are bigger in other places. So how do we get folks indoors as opposed to living in tents and encampments and sort of because this was a big part of pre-pandemic. I know for our group this was a really big issue. People had, it's not new, but people had reached sort of a new level of frustration with it. Do you see a light at the end of this tunnel?
Yeah, I think we're learning how to do it. If I say it, I mean we're learning how to get housing built and get people inside more quickly and more cost effectively during this pandemic. So I think there is that silver lining clearly. I think the governor's initiative around repurposing motels and hotels has been very effective. It's something we started doing back in 2015 here in San Jose, and converting old dilapidated motels for housing. And it's much more cost effective than building new housing, of course, and we can do it more quickly. And so, those kinds of initiatives help. Certainly the prefabricated emergency housing construction that I just discussed is another promising sign. But more than anything, the constraints are both on the resources side, but also on the sites, that is the land sites. And, we've had some more promising conversations with Caltrans in particular, great leadership there. Tokes is a wonderful director of Caltrans, who's been very open to us getting housing built on sites near freeways. And we're going to need more of that kind of collaboration with other public agencies. But finding sites is really challenging because, of course, wherever that site is, it's near somebody's neighborhood. And it takes an awful lot of folks who are willing to stand up and say, we're still going to go forward and not have the wobbly knees when 300 people show up and say, you can't possibly build that here.
Yeah.
Because the reality is we're going to have to build a lot of housing everywhere if we're going to really tackle this problem. So first, I think we need to continue to support those who have the courage to stand up and say we're going to build. And that's for all kinds of housing, certainly. But also, I think we need a different approach around public safety, because I think a lot of neighbors, our residents, are feeling quite understandably frustrated that we in California have lost control. And by that, I mean, I think we can have a compassionate response, but one that is much more proactive. Right now, it is impossible for us to get somebody who's got their pants down, who's screaming at traffic in the middle of Santa Clara Street in my city, to go anywhere, including drug treatment, because 80% of the time it's methamphetamine related,
Yeah.
or into mental health. And it's not just a capacity issue, though certainly we need to do a better job of getting out, mental health beds and drug treatment beds. But literally, we can't even get that person in front of a judge to get ordered to treatment. Part of the problem, of course, is the pandemic, but even regardless of the pandemic, this notion that we're going to continue to believe that all folks who are arrested with misdemeanors are simply going to go back out on the street right away. And there's so many police chiefs that I've heard from who are just incredibly frustrated that this pendulum has just swung too far, that it's impossible for us to even make the arrest that's necessary to be able to get that methamphetamine addict into the position where they're ordered to do what they need to do, which is go get treatment and to get off the street. And if they're not off the street, then they're going to continue using and they're going to continue causing harm. And so we need a compassionate response that builds a lot of housing, but we also need a very firm response around the public safety issues that are real, that are undermining the trust of our community in any of our solutions. And certainly I appreciate the efforts that are being made around Laura's Law and other initiatives to try to engage more folks in civil commitment, but that's really around the edges. We need a much more aggressive approach, I believe. And by aggressive, I mean, yes, compassionate. I'm not looking to lock people up. We just need to be able to give the police the tools to enable folks to get to mandated drug treatment and mental health treatment.
Yeah, no doubt, it's very frustrating. And anything, we appreciate your standing up and speaking out on that. And certainly, as a former prosecutor, I think prosecutors need to prosecute, and that unfortunately that goes along with the job title. And it's important that we balance things and we recognize the racial equity issues and so forth. But an overly permissive society comes at some cost as well. And I think we're seeing the effects of that. You mentioned before, switching back.
Can I just jump in? I do believe we can do this in a way that's equitable and ensures that we don't repeat the mistakes around racial profiling and everything else. You made a very good point. And I think it's quite possible to do both. We can be compassionate and still have control over what's happening on our streets.
No, absolutely. It's critical that we do it. You mentioned earlier about this. I don't think it's the only situation, because we hear a lot about companies moving divisions or growing their, footprints in other places and sort of making the decision, we're not going to put more here in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area. And in fact, we're going to let things attrit and so forth. But some of the companies announced, we're going to move our headquarters only. We're going to only move, and then we'll still grow. We'll still continue doing business. What's the effect of that? Because some people say, well, that's nothing. It doesn't really matter where the headquarters is. And I kind of take a little umbrage at it, but yes, can you get a little specific about when a company does that, what's the effect on the community? Does it have effect on investors, local budgets, state budget?
Yeah, time will tell, but I certainly am concerned about it for a few reasons. First, there's no question that if, for example, there's sales tax revenue that's generated by that company, just as an example, the move of their headquarters usually means that revenue is going to some other state. And I can tell you, as the headquarters city of eBay, we benefit enormously by eBay being here in the city of San Jose.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, the philanthropic interest of the company tends to move with the headquarters as well. And we have had many generous companies in the Bay Area. And I should have emphasized at the beginning, we've been great beneficiaries of a lot of companies that have stepped up, particularly during this pandemic. And when you lose the headquarters, you lose a lot. And of course, we all know how it works in corporate politics as well. If you're really ambitious, at some point or another, you need to be where the headquarters is if you're going to move up in the company. And so that creates a certain concern around talent drain for executive leadership in the region as well. And so, I don't think the sky is falling, but the clouds are darkening. And that's what we need to be focused on. The fact that Elon Musk has gone to Florida or Texas, wherever Elon's gone, that's not going to devastate our region. What is going to devastate our region is if the younger versions of Elon Musk, who come in more diverse forms of human beings who are endeavoring to innovate in all kinds of different ways, if they don't believe they can come to Silicon Valley in the Bay Area and be successful and be able to overcome the barriers to entry, then we are going to be in serious decline.
Yeah, one of the things we're seeing, and we don't know whether it's a blip or not, Mayor, is a reduction in our share of venture capital investment, which was up close to 50% and kind of hung in there for a long time. And in the last iteration, we were down a little below 30 for the first time. Now, that's still way more than any other region. And some folks say, well, more investment is moving into the cloud per se, and so forth. But talk a moment about the innovation ecosystem, which really is the underlying economic driver here. And at one time, Silicon Valley and San Francisco were like two foreign countries, sometimes at war. I think that's changed. I mean, how do you see the evolution of this, and how do you see the future?
Yeah, this is an area well beyond my expertise, but certainly from what I'm hearing from people I talk to, it seems to me that there's certainly a certain amount of bargain hunting that's going on in the VC world as well. They're recognizing that this place has been so hot for so many years. They recognize there are probably places where they can invest, as the nature of technology obviously enables diffuse innovation elsewhere in the country. We have had it so good for so long. The disproportionate amount of investment that has gone into our region for so many years, it seems difficult to imagine that that can persist forever. What is of greater concern to me, though, is the fact that those who want to actually start the companies, those who want to just be able to even getting beyond the seed round, are looking at where they want to be and saying, you know what, the cost structures are just too difficult in the Bay Area. And that's what I'm hearing time and time again from folks who are saying, it's the young innovators that are starting to choose to go elsewhere. And that is what of greatest concern, certainly to me. And I think, ultimately where the VC money goes is going to vary a lot from year to year. But I think the nature of what we know about economics and the diffusion of talent and capital and so forth means we are not going to have such a privileged place forever. So we're going to have to hustle a lot harder.
Yeah, you got to get a little hungry. I think Elon, whether we love Elon or we choose not to, he did talk about complacency. And I would say when you have 10 years of consistent growth, there is a tendency to get complacent, and I think we are that. And we've lost, as your editorial points out, we've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs in the region and well over 1 million in the state. And I can see when the dust settles on the pandemic, settling into jobs cry coming from the same elected officials who I might have suggested are business climate deniers. Roseanne Faust, who runs a great group, Sam Sita, says, you have political will. How can you encourage your colleagues to follow suit?
Yeah, look, I'll be the first to admit my own party is part of the challenge. Or let's face it, we've been a state dominated by the Democratic Party for many years. So we can only hold ourselves accountable within the party. I think that there are certainly many electeds like me who feel strongly that we need to be able to pull the party back to the middle if we're going to be a state that is going to be economically vibrant in the future. I think it's important for all of us to hold up those elected officials when they're getting attacked on issues like this, because I think, frankly, there is a concern for every Democrat that you're going to get attacked by your base. in your next election. And any pro-business Democrat is absolutely going to face a challenge from the left when they're running for re-election. So I think from a political standpoint, all I can say is, I think Steve Wesley's doing a lot of work on this statewide. I know you have been too, Jim. It's around identifying those folks throughout the state that are willing to stand up, particularly in Sacramento. And I'm going to just continue to advocate and try to, voice my views and hopefully create space and room for others to do the same.
You lead a group of the large city mayors of California. You're the chair of that. How do they feel about this issue coming out of the Bay Area region and into other parts of California? What are you hearing from your mayoral colleagues?
Yeah, what's interesting about mayors is that, some of them were former legislators and they've been in different roles and so forth. And what's remarkable is how pragmatic they become and non-ideological as soon as they assume the title mayor, because all of a sudden you're responsible for actually getting things done and people hold you accountable in different ways than if you're, in a legislature and this is, giant monolith and it's hard to hold anybody accountable. And so I think that, we have a pretty pragmatic group and very bright group, by the way. I'm constantly impressed and I learn a lot from my colleagues in that organization. And people like London Breed have certainly been outspoken on some of these issues, and I'm grateful for her leadership. I think the challenge is just the perception that mayors need to kind of stick to what they're doing in their own cities, and a certain sense that we shouldn't be driving policy statewide. And we're increasingly over the last couple of years trying to change that dynamic to say, look, mayors have something to say and the state needs to listen. And I think there are folks that are starting to take notice.
I mean, one issue is that I see is that, the state has a record surplus during a pandemic because their budget is fueled by the personal income tax, which is fueled by the stock market and business transactions, whereas local governments, for the most part, are hurting and struggling. And so there is this sort of what I see as an emerging dichotomy between the interest of the state and the interest of the local government. And I don't know how you arbitrage that, but it seems like, there really should be some, future conversation around how to get this all to function in a more cohesive, common sense fashion, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's no question there needs to be a much more progress on public finance reform. And this goes back to the housing issue as well. I mean, right now, the way the public finance is structured throughout the state of California is every city has a disincentive to build housing and has a great incentive to go build out large shopping malls and car lots, and essentially build a gated community for housing. And that is what's got us into this challenge. And so, there's a lot of public finance reform that needs to happen. But of course, those are difficult conversations to have, particularly during recessions.
Sophie Alcorn, who's a U.S. immigration lawyer in Silicon Valley, writes about the need for a startup visa, and are we going to work to convince Washington, to recognize, to bring top international entrepreneurs to Silicon Valley, and I'd like you to respond to that, but broaden that to, we now have a Democratic administration with a close friend as the Vice President of the United States, and we didn't do too well the last 4 years with on a number of issues, including SALT, which really exacerbated the impact of this incredibly high state taxes. What do you see as being our top priorities in Washington? And do you think we could get immigration reform going that would help us again?
Yeah, I've spent, probably a half dozen trips to Washington, D.C., arguing for immigration reform and trying to get this comprehensive package to get over the goal line. And by comprehensive, I mean, something that both ensures that H-1B visas and our tech leaders can continue to find the best talent in the world and ensure that that talent comes here rather than starting their businesses somewhere else in the world, in India or China. At the same time that we're providing a path to legal status for more than 12 million undocumented residents. I really think this is a great opportunity. Obviously, there are other crises right now that are higher on the list for this president, but I expect that particularly as mayors, we're going to be deeply engaged in immigration reform. And certainly I believe it needs to be a comprehensive package. or it's not going to get done. And, it's so fresh. And we saw back in 2013, even before the last president, we were so close to getting something comprehensive over the goal line, and we just couldn't get past. At that time, it was the Senate leadership to get something on the floor. This is really our moment. So I'm hopeful we can get something done in the next year and a half.
We're going to do a Bay Area Council Washington Week, virtual, of course, in about a month, the 22nd to 26th of March. So for you, if you'd like to participate with us where it counts, let us know. We might reach out to you to join us. And, for the folks who are taking part in the webinar, let us know if you'd like to participate, because it feels like a fresh opportunity for us to sort of recalibrate our relationship, and we're looking to kind of create a Bay Area caucus within the Washington, the group that represents us in Washington, and recognizing there are some unique features of our region that need attention, given the nature, the relative contribution we make to federal coffers as well as to state coffers. And so forth. We always remind our state legislators, David Chu at the top of the list, Phil Ting runs the Bay Area caucus. We outperform other regions of the state, and we're important. What I know you have to leave, so I don't want to take you. I really appreciate the extra time. Anything else you'd like to say, maybe in closing, about the business climate and what you think we could be doing to sort of turn the tide on this?
Yeah, I just want to say first, thank you to all the members of the Bay Area Council. I know you guys have been pushing on all these issues for some time. And, we need to find ways of pulling more elected leaders into the circle so that we're all speaking strongly with one voice. And I look forward to building those bridges with you so we can get some traction on these really challenging problems.
Yeah, I asked one of our members, Clint Riley. I don't know if you know Clint, but he's a rather experienced, although retired political consultant who went in the real estate business and entertainment business, and now is a publisher of several newspapers, including the San Francisco Examiner, which he intends to bring back to its to better times, and to kind of lead this effort for us to think about what a media campaign would look like, what a lobbying campaign would look like, and let folks know that this isn't just about helping business. This is about the California economy. This is about people. This is about communities of color. This is about the folks who get hurt the most when the economy takes a hit. Don't tend to be the wealthy people. They sort of find their way. Folks who are going to get hurt are the people who can least afford the impact. And we need to kind of get that message out in a way that people can hear it, and figure out a way over time, I think, to get the business community of California back to the table, not just to argue for things that are, get rid of, not just to get rid of regulations or take it easy on us on taxes, but also to figure out how to participate civically in the future of the state and local government in ways the business community historically did. And maybe, back to your earlier comments when I asked you about how the tech community can participate more, sort of create a new culture around that in the state, so that, we're not seen as just takers somehow, somehow we got in the position of being seen that way, fair or otherwise. And so, I think it's on us as well as on the elected family and the entire community to see a positive role for us. And I hope because you've stepped out on this issue and spoken so loudly, I hope you'll join with us in helping us figure out how to say it and how to mean it.
Well, Jim, thank you. You know how to say it better than anybody, but I'm certainly happy to join the chorus. And I am confident there are a lot of other folks who feel this way. And certainly as we continue to limp along, and true unemployment, I'm sure, is in double digits, even if that's not what the official tally is. I think people understand clearly the importance of being a place where employers want to be.
Yeah, and even if they want too much parking space, look, you got to root for the Sharks, okay?
Oh, yeah, yeah, we love our
That's really
Sharks.
important.
Yeah.
So let's not forget, we got to have a Stanley Cup victory one of these years. Might not be this year. We got to get there. Sam Liccardo, thank you for your leadership, and we appreciate you joining us today, and look forward to working with you and solving this. Thanks for standing up.
Always a pleasure, Jim. Thank you. Take
All
care.
right, well, thanks everybody for joining today, and sorry I didn't get to everybody's question. We got to a few, grouped them together as best we could, and work with us at the Bay Area Council on this issue, because we see it as really important. It's a moment in time. We've got to turn this exodus around. People should want to come to the Bay Area and California, not want to leave. It's not okay that people are feeling this way. We've got to change their view. Thank you very much, sir, and enjoy the rest of your day and week. Take care.
Take care, Jim.
Take care, everybody. Bye.